Let's get weird into it. Number 10. The map that shrinks Africa. Take a globe, flatten it, and suddenly, boom, Africa looks like it went on a diet it never asked for. The Mercator projection, the one you've seen in basically every classroom ever, was designed for sailors in the 1500s who needed straight lines across the ocean. It does that job really well. The catch? It completely mangles the actual size of countries. Greenland, which is basically an ice cube with a flag, looks the same size as Africa on most maps. Reality check. You could fit 14 Greenlands into Africa. The distortion is so bad that people grow up thinking Europe is this big, dominant landmass, while Africa is just kind of hanging out down there. Nope. Africa is gigantic. It's like the heavyweight champion of landmass, but the Mercator projection makes it look like a featherweight. The weirdest part is that this wasn't just an innocent math problem, it became political. When colonial powers wanted to feel important, they conveniently liked a map that made their own territories look larger, and the colonized lands look smaller. A nice little visual trick to reinforce the "we're big and powerful, you're tiny and helpless" narrative. So when you stare at a world map and think you understand geography, remember, your brain's been gaslit by centuries-old cartography. Basically, the Mercator projection is the Photoshop filter of the entire planet, stretching, squishing, and flattering Europe at Africa's expense. Number 9. Japan, the floating supermodel. Here's a fun fact. Japan sometimes commissions maps that literally move the entire country closer to the center of the world. If you're Japanese and you're taught geography in school, chances are you've seen a Japan-centered world map. Instead of Europe or the US being front and center, suddenly Japan is smack dab in the middle, looking like the main character of Earth. It's not technically wrong, because you can put the map's central line anywhere you want. But let's be real, this is straight-up ego cartography. You know how every kid in art class would draw their house way bigger than everyone else's? Same vibe. By redrawing the world with Japan in the middle, the map subtly says, hey, we're not just some island nation out east. We're literally the center of the planet. And it's not just Japan doing this. Australia does it too, flipping the map upside down so that they're on top. It's hilarious how much psychological weight comes from being in the middle or on top. Like, the land hasn't moved, but suddenly it feels like you've gained status points just from cartography tricks. This is why maps aren't just tools. They're propaganda machines in disguise. You're not just learning geography. You're learning who thinks they deserve the spotlight. So next time you see a Japan-centered map, just know, the world hasn't shifted. Only the perspective has. Number 8. The Soviet Union's stretchy borders. Imagine growing up in the USSR and looking at your school map. Spoiler. You'd see the Soviet Union looking ridiculously massive, almost like it was taking up half the globe. Now, the Soviet Union was big. No one's denying that. But their official maps often exaggerated just how sprawling their empire looked. Why? Simple. Intimidation. If you can't out-Pizza the Hut, you out-map the world. Soviet cartographers would use projections that stretch the country horizontally, making it look endless. To the average kid in Moscow, it looked like the motherland could casually wrap around the Earth and give it a bear hug. That's not geography, that's cartographic flexing. And here's the sneaky part. It worked. When other countries looked at those maps, the Soviet Union came across as this unbeatable land giant. It was a subtle form of psychological warfare, showing that we're everywhere, you can't escape us. Never mind that half of Siberia is just frozen wasteland where even trees give up. It still looked like the USSR was the ultimate territorial boss fight. So yeah, maps weren't just school tools in the Soviet era. They were Cold War propaganda posters disguised as geography homework. Basically, a political Tinder profile. 6'5", takes up half the planet, swipes left on capitalism. Number 7. The US map with 50 lies. Here's a question. Ever noticed how US maps always put Alaska floating down in the corner, looking all cozy next to Hawaii? That's not geography. That's a bald-faced lie. In reality, Alaska is huge. If you stuck it in its actual place, it would stretch across half the map and completely ruin the neat little rectangular classroom poster vibe. So cartographers cheat. They shrink Alaska down and shove it into a convenient box, like it's a piece of DLC content you can attach wherever you want. Hawaii gets the same treatment, teleported thousands of miles closer, just so the US looks like one compact, friendly package. Spoiler? It's not. The irony? This has actually warped how Americans see their own country. People underestimate Alaska's size constantly. It's bigger than Texas, California, and Montana combined. If it were placed correctly, it would visually dominate the entire map. But no, we can't have that. Because then kids would realize the US is geographically awkward. Instead, you get this sanitized version, where all 50 states politely line up like they're at roll call. Basically, every 50 states map in a school book is lying to you. It's not the United States. It's the United Shrink-Wrapped States. Number 6. The Colonial blank spaces trick. Picture this. You're a European explorer in the 1800s, and you're drawing a map of Africa. Do you carefully chart the rivers, the mountains, and the hundreds of thriving kingdoms that already exist? Nope. You just leave giant chunks of the continent completely blank. Because in your worldview, if you haven't documented it, it doesn't exist. That's exactly what colonial maps did. They literally erased people. Huge areas of Africa were marked as unexplored, which really meant unexplored by Europeans, even though locals had been navigating those lands for centuries. This wasn't a mistake. It was a marketing tactic. By making the continent look like a mysterious void, colonial powers could justify swooping in and claiming territory. And here's the kicker. When maps showed those big empty spaces, it gave explorers the illusion of discovery. Like, look at this vast land that belongs to no one. Translation: we're pretending it belongs to no one so we can take it. Cartography was weaponized to erase entire civilizations on paper before erasing them in real life. So when you see those old parchment maps with elegant borders and dramatic empty patches, remember, they weren't charming. They were gaslighting devices with fancy ink. Number 5. The Middle East made up. You know how you learned in school that countries like Iraq, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia are real places with solid borders? Well, yes, they exist. But the lines dividing them were drawn in one of the laziest, most arbitrary ways possible, literally by dudes sitting in a room with a ruler. In the aftermath of World War I, British and French officials, Sykes and Picot if you want names, carved up the Ottoman Empire like it was a pizza, except instead of carefully cutting along natural divisions, like where people lived, spoke the same language, or had shared history, they just drew straight lines on a map. That's why so many Middle Eastern borders look weirdly geometric, like someone was trying to win at Connect 4. Of course, those artificial borders completely ignored the people living there. Tribes, religious groups, and ethnic communities were suddenly mashed together or split apart because some colonial bureaucrat decided a straight line looked nice. The result? Decades of conflict that still ripple through the region today. So next time you glance at a map of the Middle East, just know those official borders are basically the result of two Europeans playing a very reckless game of doodle wars. Number 4. South up, world flipped. You've probably never questioned why North is always at the top of maps. It just feels natural, right? Like gravity works that way or something. But here's the truth. North being up is a complete invention. There's no cosmic law that says the Earth has to be drawn that way. In fact, some maps intentionally flip the world upside down. South on top, north on the bottom. Same planet, same continents. But suddenly the southern hemisphere looks like the boss. Australia goes from being the world's afterthought to sitting smugly at the top, while Europe and North America get shoved to the bottom like they're in time out. Why do this? To challenge the built-in bias of North equals superior. It's not just geography, it's psychology. For centuries, northern countries, think Europe, had more power, so they literally placed themselves above others on the map. South-up maps remind us that orientation is arbitrary, and the whole top versus bottom worldview is just propaganda baked into cartography. So if you ever see a South-up map, don't panic. You didn't fall into an alternate universe. You're just seeing the world without its Eurocentric Photoshop filter. Number 3. The treasure maps that lied. Let's switch gears to something a little more piratey. You know those old maps with giant X marks the spot symbols and neat dotted lines leading straight to treasure? Yeah, total scam. Real treasure maps didn't look like that. In fact, most of them were deliberately wrong. Here's the thing. If you buried something valuable, you didn't want just anyone with a shovel finding it. So people who made treasure maps would often leave out key landmarks, draw fake coastlines, or distort distances to throw thieves off. Basically, treasure maps were booby-trapped with lies. The best example? Pirates. They were notorious for exaggerating or forging maps entirely to mislead rivals. A pirate map wasn't a helpful guide. It was more like a prank. Imagine risking your life for months on the high seas, following an old parchment, only to dig up a random patch of sand that contained nothing but crabs. Congratulations! You've been owned by 17th century misinformation. So, when Hollywood shows maps as reliable treasure hunting blueprints, remember, the real ones were closer to trolling devices. They were the original fake news. Number 2. The Nazi World Map of Destiny. During World War II, Nazi Germany wasn't just fighting with weapons, they were fighting with maps. Propaganda offices churned out maps that exaggerated German conquests, shrank enemy territories, and made it look like world domination was inevitable. One infamous example showed a massive, glowing Germany at the center, with the rest of Europe looking like flimsy little puzzle pieces ready to be snapped into place. These maps weren't meant to educate. They were designed to terrify. Imagine being an ordinary German citizen in the 1940s. You look at your school map, and suddenly your country looks like the center of gravity for the entire planet. It made the Reich feel unstoppable, even when it wasn't. That's the sinister power of cartography. If you control the map, you control the story. To the outside world, it screamed intimidation. To the inside world, it screamed destiny, all from a few stretched borders and oversized arrows. Basically, Nazi maps were the Photoshop liquefy tool set to maximum evil. Number 1. The world. According to you. Now here's the funniest map lie of all. The one sitting in your brain. Studies show that when people are asked to draw the world from memory, they massively distort it. Americans usually make the US way too big. Brits exaggerate the UK. And Australians, well, half the time they just draw a kangaroo and call it a day. Your personal mental map is a built-in lie. The places you know best balloon in size, while unfamiliar regions shrink or vanish entirely. That's why some people can sketch their hometown street by street, but couldn't even tell you where Mongolia is on a globe. Your brain just doesn't care. It edits the world like a bad cartographer with a short attention span. So, in a way, the most misleading map isn't on paper, it's in your head. Which means every single one of us is carrying around a distorted, biased atlas upstairs. Congratulations. You're your own propaganda machine. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.